Okay, before we start with the content of today's masterclass, I want you to hear me when I say to you this sentence. You are a superhero. And I'm just gonna pause for a second. I want you to see how it feels like to hear those words. Does it feel like it's you? Does it feel like it's true? Like it what does it feel uncomfortable? Does it feel comfortable? Does it feel unrealistic? How does it feel is the first question that I'm going to ask you, and let me know in the chat. And the second question is, I want you to understand, I want you to start feeling or to start exploring where it feels. So the two questions that I want to ask you is, how does it feel if I tell you that you are a superhero, and where does it feel? The reason why I'm asking you this question is because a lot of the times when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to branding, when it comes to your voice and your style, we hold all of the knowledge in here in our brain, and we are so logical about it, and we think that we have to be strategic about it, and we have to know all of these things, where in reality, and I will show you through this masterclass, a lot of the belief that we hold are the things that are actually keeping us back or moving us forward in sharing our stories and sharing our brand. So even if you don't have an answer for now, I want you to sit with this. You are a superhero. Even if you think about it later, if you think about it in the next days, sit with it and see how it feels and where it feels. Let me see there. It feels both true and fabricated. In my chest, it feels like I can have been a superhero, and also I'm not. Even though I have deeper knowing I am. Okay? Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing, Jam. I love it feels realistic but uncomfortable. The discomfort, especially in my chest. I love that there is this consistency in where it feels. It's in your chest, which is, like our heart, right? And it means that there is something that is communicating to you about this sentence. Now I'm going to introduce myself because before I bring you deeper into the rabbit hole of storytelling and sharing your story and creating your brand, with your authentic voice in mind. And the way I'm going to introduce myself is, first of all, with the professional background, right? So my name is Beatrice Ngalula Kabutakapua. I work as an international speaker. I am a business storytelling coach. I am an author, and all of the things that I do have as a goal to make sure that people who are usually not heard, who have been systemically unheard and marginalized, actually find the ways to share their stories. And when I say sharing their stories, I don't mean that we're going into the square and everyone is going to shout out their stories or, just share their stories randomly. I'm talking about having both the confidence and the clarity and the tools to create a narrative around what you do that is both reflective of your authentic self and your lived experience, but also is something that your audience can easily receive, right? And I've been doing this for the past 7 years. This is actually the 8th years that I'm working as a business storytelling coach. Before that, I used to work as a journalist, as a communication consultant, as a documentary maker, and I've worked with initially with women of color entrepreneurs, and I would help them to find their stories, own their stories, and then sharing them. And then I started working with corporate organizations. I run a company called the Business Storytelling Center. And these are the places or the ways I bring my knowledge in. Um, and this is the professional, the professional side of me, the working part of me. But really, how I got to do all that I'm doing is a result of who I am as a person. And I want to highlight that because who you are and what you do, especially in the case of people who are multi anything, different cultures, different backgrounds, heritage, languages, experiences, lived experiences, we oftentimes are very much linked. Our lived experience is very much linked to what we do as well. So in my case, I, as a human, as a person, I am the daughter of immigrants. I was born in Italy, but my parents came from Congo. So my culture is both the Congolese one and the Italian one. But then I moved to the UK, which is where I live now. And I've been here for the past 16 years. That's like a teenager. So it's been a very long time, and that's also part of my culture now. Apart from this, I have mixed lived experiences for cultures and for the languages. And growing up, I've always thought that I was a shy person because I was very, very quiet. And I will tell you a little bit more about it later. But in reality, what I realized growing up and reading and informing and listening to other people's stories is that I wasn't quiet. I'm just an introvert. And that's another part, another reality of my humanity. The reason why I'm sharing this is not because you have to have my entire background so that we can go through this masterclass, but I'm sharing this because all of the aspects that are part of my life, I put in my business as well. And I put them in my branding as well. And these are all things that are part of me that I want to bring in the work that I do. And I'm going to ask you to share in the chat what you do as well. What brought you here, and what you do. And while you answer, I'm going to share something that I actually found out just recently, or I refound recently. So I was going through my journals. I am a very compulsive writer. I've been writing for a very long time, and I write often daily, several journals. And it's oftentimes easy to see where you are. I'm a published author, a best-selling author. I've worked with amazing organizations and amazing people and folks who have gone to have their stories shared on in Netflix documentaries. But this is not how I started, and this is not something that was always part of how I showed up in the world. I really didn't think at the very beginning that my voice mattered. And I found this journal entry that I wrote in 2019. So that was the year after I started working as a business storytelling coach. And I don't know if you can read this, but it says, "What I'm afraid of, being myself, being out there, being visible, talking to stranger, and doing vox pop." Vox pop, if you're not familiar with this, it's something that I'm still terrified about, but it's basically in journalism when you go outside in the street and you get random reaction from people, like you ask them random questions and then you interview them. And I hated the idea of going out to someone who I didn't know. But what I really want to highlight is that in 2019, one of my biggest fear, which has always been one of my biggest fear, was being visible. Now, I want to bring you to 2025, which is when I appeared in a video that was published on YouTube and it was made by QuickBooks. I did the casting for this video, which is already something that my past self would have never done. So I saw the casting call for this video and I thought, let me do something very uncomfortable that I would never do. Let me just go ahead and apply and respond to this casting call. And I did, and I participated to this casting call, to this video. And the video was seen at the time when I took the screenshot, was seen by 293,000 people around the world. And to think about the fear of being visible and then where I am now, sometimes it's something that I forget about. It's something that I forget because I forget the journey. But it's very important to keep track of the journey, because where you are now is not where you're going to be 1 week from now, or 3 months from now, or 1 year from now. Okay, so as much as you can, document your journey. GEM, I work with women and families to support them in conception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, also with mamas who didn't have an optimal postpartum to repair before menopause. Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And in terms of what brings you here, I'm going to give you the time to answer these questions, but it's very important for me to know what brings you here. What is important for you in when it comes to your story, when it comes to your branding, when it comes to your voice. Mariam work on the field of non-formal education with a high focus on funding-related advocacy in Europe, support young marginalized youth in gaining opportunities in international projects, PR, and I try to incorporate as much direct as much possible that a group work and empowerment as my job allows. I'm also a singer. Oh, I love that. I love to tell stories about myself through my music. This will be what I'm still building a narrative. Awesome. And then you say that you envision a future where your public speaking and your music are in line and authentic to my lived experience. I absolutely love that. There is no rule that tells you that you have to separate the two. Okay, so I've also personally always thought, and with the examples that was given, that it's either the way you do business or it's either your lived experience, but the two do not have to be separated, and I'm going to show you how not to separate them today. I'm going to skip through some of the things that I usually do, because I do believe that we are already in agreement to what how we show up during this masterclass, so that you are really present in the time that we have together. Which also mean that whenever you have a question, whenever you have a reflection, something that you want to share, just put it in the chat so that we can all use from that, benefit from that wisdom. It's very easy to digest the information a lot of the times without actually asking the questions, and you never know how much other people really need those as well. So I'm going to skip on giving you the precise list of agreement. And I'm going to read from Jem. I work in this area from lived experience of a postpartum that was depleted, and now I'm sharing knowledge of how it can be. So if I understand that correctly, Jem, you also want to share your lived experience of postpartum. Is that correct? Let me know if I got that right. Okay, perfect, perfect. All right. I told you before at the very beginning, and I loved your reaction, and I loved how it was felt in your chest, that you are a superhero. And I want you to stay on this idea, because I want you to understand that, first of all, what you do, not everyone else does it, and what you care about, not everyone else cares about. A lot of the times, especially when you do the work, the kind of work that really helps other people, we just assume that everyone cares, right? Everyone will do that. No, not everyone will do that. Honestly, not everyone cares. And I want you to understand that you are special in that way, and that your lived experience and your knowledge come together. They're not separated. And like superhero, you have a backstory, right? You have a story that maybe is made of trauma. You have a story that maybe it's made of meeting other people. You have a mission, you have a vision. And we have to stop thinking of people who are special as someone else rather than ourselves. That's why I use this sentence. I tell you that you are a superhero. It's a very sometimes it's a very uncomfortable because you don't immediately identify as that, and this is the reason why I want you to claim it and I want you to stay with it. And like other superhero, you have this backstory that it's not just one story, right? It's not just one event. I mean, I'm sure that if were to ask you, what brought you to what you're doing now, that is the main story. Actually, think about it. If I had to ask you what brought you to what you're doing now, if you were to give me an answer, you would probably give me one main story, and then there would be, other pieces of it, right? There would be other elements of it. And let me know if this is true. Because really, you are the way I like to see us is that we are a never ending puzzle, and each piece of that puzzle makes you a whole. And it's important to remember that for two reasons. First of all, because I want you to understand that you are always evolving. You're not going to stay who you are today. And that evolution, that development is fundamental for you to go from having a lived experience and having some stories that you want to share to actually be confident and clear and outspoken and using your voice. That will require an evolution, it will require a development. And that's a beautiful thing. And the second reason why I like this idea of seeing yourself as a never-ending puzzle is because there are so many different pieces of your lived experience that made you who you are. Why can't you bring them to what you do as well? And it's very important to do that because once you figure out how to talk about your lived experience and how to talk about what you do, then that will resonate with other people as well. And I'm assuming that that's what you want, right? Because when you're talking about public speaking, when you're talking about sharing your story, it's not because you want to talk to yourself, right? Let me know if that's true. Like, tell me, just give me a yes if that's true for you. You don't want to share your lived experience or your story just because, for the fun or for the sake of it. You want to share it because you want to help someone else, because you want to support someone else, because someone else need to see that there is a different way, right? Perfect. Now, how do you actually go from knowing what you do about your lived experience to actually have something compelling and cohesive that you can share with people? Think about the questions that I've put down. This is a very short exercise that you can screenshot and you can continue it later, just because we have the time that we have right now. But I want you to think about yourself and think about all the characteristics that make you you, right? So the lived experiences, the behavior, the things that you won't tolerate, the things that you would get in trouble for when you were little. List as many of those as you can. Actually, put some of the things that come up in your mind right away in the chat so that we can all see, all the things you would get in trouble for when you were little and all those kind of things. List as many as they come in your mind. Do not censor yourself. This is not the space where you have to censor yourself. This is the space where you can be vulnerable, open. You're not going to be judged. You're not getting scores, points, or anything like that. This is the space where you share and where you can be you. So think about some of your characteristics and write them down. Write them all down. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds, 10 seconds. Is it a tough question? What makes you you? I mean, sometimes it is a difficult question because we move into a very fast world and we don't get the chance to actually pause and just absorb who we actually are, you know? We have way too many inputs from the outside. There are way too many voices tell us who we should be, who we shouldn't be, and we don't spend enough time just listening where things are feeling and how they're feeling for us, you know? And also, a lot of the time, some of the behaviors and characteristics that we have, they they are seen as negative from the outside world, and they're not necessarily negative. Okay, Jen. Being bossy, strong-willed, also quiet and introverted. This is such a beautiful juxtaposition. Just the word doesn't come out, but yeah, it's such a beautiful um, association. Being strong-willed, being bossy, but also quiet and introverted, sometimes extroverted, depending on the situation. A focus on evolution and connection. Perfect. Top of your these are on top of your head. That's perfect. And then the question would be, which one of these are relevant for what you do? My immediate answer would be everyone, like all of them in different ways. For instance, I'm gonna give you an example, especially by thinking of answering the next question as well, which is which one resonate with your audience. For instance, the focus on evolution and connection, right? So if you focus on connection, it means that everything that is related to getting to know people a little bit better, even when it comes to being introverted, getting to know people a little bit better, having those deeper conversations, that's part of who you are, and it's part of something that you can bring to your work as well. I'm going to give you an example. Growing up, I used to organize. I'm also an introvert. Sometimes I'm an extrovert, depending on the people I've got in front of me and their energy. But I used to organize when I was when I was like late teenager. I used to organize dinners with some of my friends. But because I used to have individual friends, I would always interact with them individually, but they wouldn't know each other, right? So every year, at least twice a year, I would organize these dinners at my place, at my parents' place, and everyone had to bring something to eat, something to share with everyone else. And then everyone had such a different background from each other that they interacted in the evening, they shared with each other, and there were never more than 15 people because that would have been way too many people for my character. But I really love to see that interaction, and all I was doing was just facilitating that interaction. That happened ages ago. And then last year I published my book. I had the book launch event, and I was given the exact same feedback I was given when I was running these dinners when I was a teenager, which was, oh, you always bring together such amazing people. And that really reminded me of what I used to do when I was a teenager. But it also reminded me of the fact that with all the work that needs to be done for your business to promote it, to write it, to be visible, I miss the closer connection to people. So what I've done this year is starting these dinners again. They are not personal in terms of they're not for my personal life, but they're for business. So I do these dining experiences, which is an experience where 15 people at most can come together. We have an initial moment which is around storytelling, around understanding how they can share their story. We have a meal together, and really the connection is not about, oh, let's network, what do you do, and these kind of things. It's really about the deeper connection. And it is a service that it's part of my of the things that I do for my work, but really it's a way for me to come back to myself, to who I am, to what I need, right? So when you mention connection, how can you incorporate that in what you do? Mariam, that help understanding the question, extroverted and smiley to the outside, empathetic and positive, quite introverted when I allow myself, courageous, confident, chatty. Oh, I love all of this. I really, really love that. And I find it interesting that you mentioned, I don't know about your specific backgrounds, but I find it interesting that you mentioned that you're quite introverted when you allow yourself to be. And as a coach, I would have like a trillion follow-up questions on that, but I'm gonna hold myself. But yeah, it's interesting that sometimes we need that permission, right? Okay, so when it comes to all these characteristics, how can you incorporate them in your work, and which one can you incorporate? I gave you my example, and we could, have so many other examples. But think about that. Every time that you create something, or every time that you want to meet someone, or that you want to do business development, think about, how can I be me while doing this? So many times when we think about bringing our stories, using storytelling, doing branding, promoting the business, the idea is that you need to have the knowledge, from your brain, and you just have to practice, and you have to apply the knowledge, and that's how storytelling works. The truth is that you need an equal part, your story, your storytelling skills, and your storytelling um, actions, and your branding is an equal part of knowledge, practice, and lived experience. So you cannot take away the lived experience. You don't want to take away your lived experience, both because once you take away your lived experience, then you take away what makes you you, you take away what relates to your audience, and you also take away on a business level, you take away your unique selling point, right? Because there can be 15,000 people being working as business storytelling coaches, right? But not everyone will have the lived experience that I do, because the lived experience that I have shape the work that I do in the way that I do it, right? Let me know if this makes sense. Give me a thumb up if this makes sense, if this is computing for you. Awesome. Okay. There are so many examples that I could share from my clients about how working on your brand and working on your story doesn't just have a positive impact on your work, but it has a positive impact in your life in general. I mean, I became a much more confident person. I'm much more firm with my boundaries in life and in work. And one example that I wanted to share is from Karen, who is a photographer, and not only a photographer, she's a creative person in general and a coach. And she took part in one of the group coaching program that I run every 2 years. And this is what she shared after. I'm doing okay. Things in my world intensified, and yet I'm very grounded in who I am. So all is okay. A big part of that feeling of groundedness is due to the work I did during your program. So there is a lot that she shares about her business, about her relationship with with her family. So it's not just about, your audience and yourself. It's also about your life. It's much more deeper than what the bros out there are telling us it is. This was this officially ends. No, it doesn't end, but it officially ends the inspirational part and the hard part of the masterclass, because you now know that everything that is related to your brand, to your narrative, to your story, it's not just about having a piece of paper, writing it down, and telling people what you do, how you do it, and using some beautiful storytelling ways of doing that. But it's about owning and having a deep knowledge of your story. And that doesn't just help your business, it helps you as a human being as well. However, once you have all of this beautiful clarity around your story, how do you actually translate it into something that people can understand? It took me a very long time to do that myself, because first of all, I did it by myself. I didn't have a guidance, and I didn't have guidance. Second, I wasn't sure what the framework was, what the practical things were, and I didn't have resources. But by coaching leaders and entrepreneurs for the past 8 years, what I realized is that every leader, every entrepreneur, every creative, in order for them to go from have all of this lived experience, I don't have a cohesive narrative, I don't know if I can, be on a stage, and I'm feeling self-conscious about this, to actually feeling grounded and feeling confident and feeling clear about their stories, they have to go through 5 stages. Those 5 stages are portrayed in this framework that I share here and that I talk about deeply in my book, Lead with Your Story. And it's about finding your story, which is what we talked about now. Owning your story, which means you might know what your stories are, but you might feel extremely self-conscious and extremely vulnerable sharing them. And the reason why you feel that way is because you haven't taken enough time thinking about what you have learned from those stories. It doesn't matter whether they were, positive or negative stories. It's really about understanding what they gave you as a person, as a business owner, as a creative, as you. Once you know that, once you have that clarity, you don't have to share all of the stories, but you will have, I guarantee you, you will have so much more confidence. And once you have that, then you can communicate through stories. You can actually use those stories or some stories to communicate with your audience. And then you can use stories to lead, especially when you are the leader of your organization. And then the last step, which is really something that you consistently have to do, is that you have to sustain the work, which means that you have to find your community, your space where you can really continue to evolve and to develop yourself. And you can find that support as well, a space where you can be like, complain and share with someone. Now, today I really wanted to focus on one element of the focus framework. If you have any questions or thoughts that come to mind, put them in the chat, and I'm going to make sure that I read them. But really, what I want to focus on today is communicating through stories, which means, okay, I have all of these stories. How do I actually get them out? And to get them out, I am going to share another framework with you. We will not have the opportunity to go through each element of the framework in the way that I would like to go through, because I want to make sure that we have some time to answer your questions. But what I want to say is, first of all, is that you can find the details of both frameworks in my book, Lead with Your Story, but also that this one, when it comes to sharing stories, it's, you will hear and you will see that there are so many different ways, so many different tools, so many different arcs and element, the hero journey, and you will hear of all of these things, right? But really, what I found out working in storytelling for more than 20 years and from so many different angles is that there are only 5 elements that you need to keep in mind when you want to share a story, especially if you want to make sure that your story is cohesive, it's clear, and it makes sense for others. And those elements are the story, being human, the audience, being personal and entertaining. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean for each of them. So, when it comes to the S in shape, it's about what we usually know, the story. What's the storyline? The initial situation, the development, and the end. But also ask yourself these questions. What is the story that you want to share? Why do you want to share it? Why does it matter? And why does it matter to your audience? And what is the lesson? If you could just select 2 questions to ask yourself, the 2 questions are, what is the lesson and why? Always ask yourself why. A lot of the times, and I will not go on and on about it, but a lot of the times we are frustrated seeing these stories from different people, and we empathize. Have a try with it. Just scroll on Instagram after the masterclass and see when a story that is being shared makes you think, oh, I'm so sorry that this happened to this person. And when a story that is being shared makes you more motivated, and it makes you feel like, oh, I can actually do that, or this is actually helping me as well. The difference between those 2 stories is that one is just, sharing whatever story without thinking about their audience in particular, and the other one is giving you the answer to the question, what is the lesson? The stories that we love to consume, the fictional stories, they always have a lesson. Whether we like the lesson or not, they always have a lesson. Your story needs to have a lesson for people to make sense for people. Okay. So I'm not gonna give you all the examples here because I want to make sure that I tell you a little bit more about the rest of the pieces of the framework. So when it comes to be human, it really means that you want to make sure that you know that you are talking to humans and you are human yourself. So let's abandon that nonsense where you speak as an academic once you are talking about your story, and or once you're doing professional speaking. People need to see the same person whenever you're sharing the story or when you're not sharing the story. So talk in the same way, talk in the same, use the same language, use the same body language as well. Be you. The audience, there is so much to say about the audience, but it will take some time to go through that. But the audience, think about them all of the time. Who is your audience? What do they need? P is personal, and it means that you want to address 3 questions: why it matters to you, why it matters to your audience, or why it matters for your company if you run a company. So being personal really translate to why should we care? Why do I care? And there is a beautiful TEDx talk by the founder of Pixar that really summarizes the idea that storytelling is about making people care. You want them to care, right? So why should they? That's what you answer in the personal one. And then entertaining is not about making sure that people laugh when they see your story. It's about making sure that there is some way to engage people beyond the words or beyond any other ways that you are using, right? So it's about using images, music, video, even the way you lay out a written story. All of these things are so that you can make sure that people do not are not put off by the story because the way it's presented is not entertaining or engaging enough. Okay, let me know if there are questions around this. And apologies for my beautiful cold that decided to hit me this week. I have to say I'm not enjoying it at all, but yeah, probably is my body trying to communicate something to me. All right, so I talked about the storyline. I'm just going to read you this example in particular because it really shows in a very specific way how to structure the story. And then I'm going to go to questions because I really want to answer your question. We used to try to just ignore bad news, head in the sand, pretend it wasn't happening, find happy distractions. And it kind of worked for a while until it didn't. The bad news was too overwhelming and left us feeling stuck, cynical, and apathetic. Then we remembered this Fred Rogers quote. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers." You will always find people who are helping. And it changed everything. Instead of just turning the bad news off, Roger's mother told him to look a little harder, to look for the helpers. And to this day, she hasn't been wrong. Everywhere bad news is, helpers aren't far away. In fact, they are everywhere. And even more than that, the more we look for, find, and celebrate the ones helping, the more we want to be the ones helping. Good, Good, Good was founded on that idea. We are a hopeful collective fighting against hate, fear, and injustice in the world by celebrating and becoming the good. As we look for the helpers and their stories, we learn how to take action and join in making change. We are so glad you are here. There is so much to say about this very short story. This was an Instagram post, and yet it's so compelling, it's so clear, it's so clearly structured as well. There is an initial, an introduction, the development, and end, and the call to action as well. There is a lot about the language as well that they decide to use. So if you can do another thing once we go through the masterclass is start collecting the stories that in some way resonate with you or that you really enjoyed and start thinking about why these hit so hard. Why do I like it so much? What do I like about it? Because this is how you're going to learn as well and you're going to improve your own storytelling skills. So let me know. I'm conscious of time, and I really, really want to read your questions. Let me know what questions you have, and I will close by telling you this one thing that it's something that I have to repeat myself over and over again, and sometimes it's not even enough. But I always have to remind myself why I started. And sometimes the best way to do that is by looking at feedback from people. So sometimes you won't feel like sharing your story. Sometimes you will feel kind of weak or kind of, you can't be bothered. You're not in the phase where you really feel like sharing with people. Always remember why you started. I actually keep a folder in my Google Drive which is a folder of all the feedback that I get from people that isn't necessarily linked to my work either, but it's just something that I look at so that I can remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, before I go to the questions, I'm going to give myself another minute to do this. There is always this thing about, you go through a masterclass and then what? You have learned all of these things and then what? Where do you go from here? And the way I see it, it's really like a little bit, like in the Matrix, you take the blue pill, you take the red pill. So where do you go from here? What happens now? And I first of all want to ask you to write down where you are based in the comments, because the easiest thing that you can do moving on is to connect with me so that you can continue to work on your storytelling skills and having the um, the the inspiration and knowing and learning. And we can connect on Instagram at BEA underscore storytelling coach. And that's the easiest thing that you can do. Apart from that, if you want to work with me in particular, I told you I'm doing these dining experiences where you can work on your story, and that will be a beautiful way to continue the actual practice on your story. Um, So let me know what you're going to do. And thank you so much.